Good afternoon and welcome to this pre-recorded talk. It's early morning here in the UK, but I hope to join you in person, technology permitting, for any questions at the end of my lecture. I'm very honoured to be invited to give this keynote by PARADISEC in its 100th terabyte anniversary, and absolutely delighted to contribute to a celebration of the work of Linda Barwick, who's been a friend and colleague for many years. I don't think I need to spell out her contributions to PARADISEC, to language studies and to ethnomusicology for this audience. Suffice it perhaps to emphasise that her focus on the vocal musics of Australia and Italy encompasses many different aspects of each tradition, and successfully integrates the nitty-gritty of musical and linguistic analysis with the wider exploration of meanings, contexts and histories. It's that kind of holistic ethnomusicology to which I also aspire, though in a short talk I'm afraid I won't even attempt to get very far into the nitty-gritty. Ethnomusicologists in the UK rarely encounter specialists in Australian Indigenous music. But in the autumn of 2019, we were extremely fortunate, thanks to the Leverhulme Trust, to be able to host Linda at SOAS for 3 months as a Leverhulme visiting professor, during which she gave a memorable series of 4 public lectures entitled The Future of Endangered Songs. The theme of endangered languages is very familiar here, especially at SOAS, but we don't often discuss endangered music as such. Many ethnomusicologists think that endangerment and extinction are just a part of the natural life cycle of culture, which we can't and shouldn't do anything about, apart from depositing our field recordings in some appropriate archive. How different, for example, is the view of linguists. The prospectus for the linguistics department at SOAS is forthright on this issue. I quote, "In our languages lies our accumulated wisdom. Each language is a unique expression of the human experience of the world, because it embodies information about the culture of its speakers and the knowledge acquired by previous generations. Thus, linguistic diversity constitutes one of the greatest treasures of humanity, an enormous storehouse of our cumulative knowledge of the universe. As a famous linguist once said, each time a language is lost, it is like dropping a bomb on the Louvre." End of quote. Given that the loss of a language is likely to mean the loss of songs sung in that language, and given that music is itself a form of knowledge, it follows that this cry from the heart should apply as much to music as to language. It is, however, the job of ethnomusicologists to explain to a sometimes sceptical world what kinds of knowledge are embodied in the words and music of songs. So it was enlightening to hear Linda spell out for a mixed audience of ethnomusicologists, linguists and anthropologists just how important songs are as repositories of knowledge, meaning and human experience. Songs, of course, combine language and music, and in that combination lies much of their interest. We spent a whole day discussing that relationship. Linda also addressed the dynamics of community engagement and documentation, and we spent another whole day discussing that. In other lectures, she discussed the processes of creating and transmitting songs in changing environments. In her first lecture, Linda asked, "What is enabled by singing?" In the Aboriginal context, singing enables the memorialisation and transmission of knowledge embedded in country, where country contains the essence of the ancestors. Country, ancestors, community and the individual emerge from her account as a complex world that songs remember, nurture and continually recreate. Rather than as discrete, unchanging artifacts, she suggested we can think of songs as moments in a never-ending flow of knowledge, forms and practices into new contexts. I'm sure I'm not alone in having subsequently reviewed my own experiences in the light of Linda's lucid analysis, and I'll share some of my resulting thoughts with you in this talk. So I will start my PowerPoint presentation here. Much of my recent research has centred on the Darfar tradition of Hindu-Buddhist devotional singing in the Kathmandu Valley of Nepal. Here the never-ending flow of song is entering a critical phase, threatened by long-term social and economic changes as much as by the disasters of the 2015 earthquake and the current pandemic. What does Darfar singing enable? What would be lost if Darfar became extinct? What's the knowledge that Darfar songs embody in their words, language, musical structure and performance? How do Darfar songs remember, nurture and continually recreate country, ancestors, community and the individual? In the short time at my disposal, I'll briefly sketch some possible answers to these questions. The Kathmandu Valley, originally known as Nepal, is an area of about 25 by 30 kilometres in the foothills of the Himalayan mountain range. Because of its exceptional agricultural fertility and its position on an ancient trade route between India and Tibet, it became the most prosperous centre in the region. The valley is home to the ethnic group known as the Newars, who practice a syncretic mixture of Hindu and Buddhist religions. For centuries, the three small city-states of Bhaktapur, Lalitpur and Kathmandu competed for political supremacy and cultural superiority, as is demonstrated in its many magnificent palaces and temples. A lineage of Newar kings, the Mullahs, ruled the three cities from the 12th to the 18th centuries. In 1768-9, the Newar rulers were defeated by an invader from further west, the Gorkhali king Prithvinarayan Shah, who united three cities and a sizable empire beyond the valley under his rule, which was centred on the city of Kathmandu. The mountainous terrain and the Gorkha armies protected this enlarged Nepal from foreign conquest, but a process of internal colonization and suppression rendered the Newars a minority in their homeland. The Shah dynasty remained on the throne throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. But for 100 years, the Rana clan of oligarchs effectively controlled the country, imposing a policy of national isolation and internal suppression of dissent until the restoration of the monarchy in 1951. Democratic institutions had to wait a further 40 years, and were then severely tested by the Maoist insurgency throughout the country for 10 years. Following the Palace massacre of 2001 and a suspension of democracy in 2005, a largely discredited monarchy was replaced by a new democratic republic in 2008. Thus, despite the appearance of stasis for long periods in the past, the recent past and present are marked by both economic and political instability. Newar society is hierarchically organised in a complex caste system, but in Bhaktapur the majority of Darfar groups belong to the middle-ranking castes of farmers. The farmers traditionally live in compact neighbourhoods in the city. The men go out to work in the fields during daylight hours, so singing Darfar, which is a male activity, has to take place in the early morning or evening. Singing Darfar is or was central to the social and religious life of a farmer's neighbourhood. According to local tradition, an ancient king decreed that every neighbourhood should provide the four necessities of social life: a source of water, see the well in the background of this photograph, a temple, the building just to the left of the well, which is a small shrine of the god Ganesh. A platform providing shelter for trade or social activities. There are two in this example. And a dafa group, here sitting to sing on one of the platforms in the early morning. In the 1980s, most farmer neighbourhoods still supported at least one dafa group, sometimes more, and according to Gert Wegner's 1984 survey, there was a total of 70 such groups around the city. My resurvey in 2004, while most of these groups still existed, their frequency of performance and sometimes their membership were often sadly reduced. Although dafa singing is now mainly an activity of the farmer communities, it did not originate in that context. Many aspects of the songs, including their melodic and rhythmic structure, and above all their texts, show that they originated in the palaces of the later Mullah kings and their Shah successors, where court musicians, some of them from India, and court poets writing in the court languages, Sanskrit, Hindi and Old Newari, were involved in composition of dafa songs. These languages are not generally understood by the singers today, and so the songs take on other meanings and functions more relevant to the farmers. To take a specific example, the song Ganamani is one of the best known and most frequently performed songs in the Bhaktapur dafa repertoire. Here is the beginning of a performance of the song by the Kyo dafa group. After this slow beginning, the singing quickly becomes more vigorous. You may have noticed some of the distinctive features of Darfar performance practice. At the outset, one singer sings the rag, a non-metrical introduction that outlines the melodic material or mode of the song. The song is then sung by two groups of singers, sitting facing each other and singing alternately, with much repetition of each line of the song and periodic changes of tempo from slow to fast or vice versa. The words of the song are written in a folding book, one for each side of the singers. Some of the singers play cymbals of two sizes, marking and decorating the metrical structure, the tal. These words, rag and tal, come of course from the Indian classical music tradition. Between the two groups sits the drum player, who plays an elaborate but largely pre-composed accompaniment. The style of singing and playing is loud, forceful, and in the fast portion of each verse, energetic. So, what is this song about? Here's a translation by the Newar scholar Nutandhar Sharma. The original text is in a mixture of Sanskrit, Hindi, and Old Newari. As in the songs of Kathleen Fitz-Napananka, analysed by Linda, the multiplicity of languages contributes to the song's meaning, but here they all evoke the same context of origin, not the direct ancestors of the farmers, but the vanished world of a courtly, literate, aristocratic and autocratic elite. The last verse of the song tells us that it was composed by Ranjit Malla, the last Newar king of Bhaktapur, who was driven into exile by the invading Gorkhalis in 1769. Ranjit was a prolific composer of Darfar songs, which still form the bulk of the repertoire in Bhaktapur. Legend has it that as the cannons of Prithvi Narayan Shah were pounding the gates of Bhaktapur, Ranjit Malla was sitting in his palace singing rags and Darfar songs. Perhaps this was one of the songs he sang, as it is a hymn of praise to the protecting deity of the royal lineage, the goddess Bhagavati or Taleju, whose temple is in the palace. Ranjit addresses her as the all-powerful source of his salvation. You can see a representation of Taleju on the gate of her temple on the right, a gate erected by Ranjit Malla in 1753. None of this historical context is of direct relevance to the present-day farmers, who've reinterpreted the song as dedicated to Ganesh, the elephant-headed son of Shiva. Ganesh is traditionally venerated at the start of any undertaking to ensure its success through his blessings, and he's consequently one of the most popular Hindu deities, also worshipped by Buddhists in Bhaktapur, and he's especially popular with farmers whose lives literally depend on the success of their labour. Almost every farmer's neighbourhood has a small shrine to this deity at its heart, as we saw in an earlier slide, whereas Taleju is only to be found in the royal palace. Darfar groups sing Ganamani at shrines of Ganesh, both in their own neighbourhood and when they visit other neighbourhoods in Bhaktapur, and it's one of the first songs that beginners are taught to ensure the success of their learning endeavours. This reassignment of meaning is probably due to the first word of the song, Ganamani, literally jewel of the multitude. The multitude is Shiva's retinue of lesser deities, demons and ghosts, and Ganesh is traditionally its leader, as his name implies. So the jewel of the multitude could plausibly refer to him. But the rest of the song text, with its repeated cry, "O Mother," is clearly addressed to a goddess so powerful that she, rather than Ganesh, commands Shiva's legions. In this way, reconstruction and translation of Dafar texts reveals layers of historical and cultural meaning that underlie whatever meaning and function the singers themselves perceive or ascribe. This is possible because, unlike the songs of a living composer, Dafar songs are historical artifacts, treasured for their antiquity even when their original meanings are forgotten. Dafar singers proudly point to the names of royal composers like Ranjit Malla in their songbooks, just as they take pride in the historical temples and palaces at the centre of the city, and which tourists come from all over the world to see. Such artifacts do evoke a world of ancestors, even if separated from the farmers both in time and in social rank. But as far as I know, there are no composers of Dafar songs today. What matters now is not the composition of new songs, but the continuation of performance in changing contexts. So why has the context changed from palace to farmer's neighbourhood? And why is the continuation of performance so important? At the Dattatreya temple, one of the oldest, largest and most important temples in Bhaktapur, a Dafar group composed of farmers sings every evening 365 days in the year, except when prevented by national calamity such as an earthquake or pandemic. It's likely that the Dafar tradition here goes back at least to the 18th century and would have been patronised by the Mullah kings. In the 19th century, the group was composed of high caste merchants who lived adjacent to the temple. In the early 19th century, King Rajendra Shah donated land to the group to support its expenses, stressing in documents that survive that the group should perform daily, without interruption, quote, "in the service of God, praising the king," end of quote. Part of the deal then was that the group should glorify not only the gods, but also the current rulers, presumably through singing songs composed by or about them and containing their names. By the mid-19th century, under the Rana oligarchy, the composition of such songs had ceased, and an exodus of higher castes from Bhaktapur to the national capital, Kathmandu, had begun. By the early 20th century, farmers were taking the places of the high caste singers, but continuing their duty to sing daily, which they maintain as far as possible to the present day. In this way, the larger temples of Bhaktapur maintain, at some remove, the Mullah period tradition of Dafar singing, which the early Shah kings of Kathmandu and the elite castes of Bhaktapur patronised for their own glorification and spiritual benefit. The practice of Dafar spread to the farmer castes because they provided services to their high caste landlords and emulated their culture. This dynamic is currently destabilised by the fact that farmers are now themselves the landowners, are selling their land for building to accommodate an expanding population, and with greater wealth and education are rapidly leaving behind both the profession of farming and the cultural traditions that went with it. Like the higher castes before them, they're increasingly heading for office jobs in Kathmandu, 8 miles down the road, instead of to their fields. Aside from these large-scale temporal and social changes, what does Dafar mean to a neighbourhood community of farmers? Many communities regard it as a matter of their identity and prestige to preserve their own Dafar tradition, and also as a debt owed to their ancestors, which they in turn will demand of their own children. Dafar singer Jagannath Lochimossu explained to me that his uncle and grandfather specifically charged him to continue the tradition by which their name and fame would be remembered. In the words of anthropologist Stephen Parish, for Newars, harm to tradition is tantamount to harm to persons, to the family line, which includes the dead and those yet to be born. Passing on the tradition, however, is no easy matter. Training in Dafar is an elaborate social process involving recruitment of a group of students supported by their parents and the whole neighbourhood, many months of daily teaching sessions by a roster of different teachers, and many rituals and feasts, a process so costly in money, time and energy that it can only be undertaken at intervals of at least 10 years. These days they happen even more rarely, and the young boys who are taught to sing lose interest in Dafar very rapidly, given the competing attractions of cricket, films and school exams. Yet until now, many neighbourhoods regarded training in Dafar as an essential rite of passage for their male children, whereby they gained both the religious and social knowledge that they needed to become fully integrated members of society. This Pirani Puja, or initiation ceremony, happened in 2003 and marked the first performance in public of a group of young boys and adolescents who had completed their training in Dafar singing or playing. The day-long religious ritual and performance was witnessed by the boys' female relatives, the menfolk being busy in the fields, apart from the Dafar teachers, identified by their white turbans. Afterwards, the students were presented with traditional gifts to mark their new status as initiates in music: a white turban, a cap, a bowl of sweet yoghurt, and a few coins. So what is it about singing here that makes it an appropriate form of enculturation by which the individual is absorbed into the community? Among the defining characteristics of Dafa are the antiphonal alternation between the two groups of singers, multiple repetitions of each line of the song according to a set pattern, and changes of tempo between slow and fast at prescribed points in the pattern. In this diagram, representing the repetition pattern for one verse of Gunnamunny, the colours yellow and green represent the right and left groups of singers respectively. Thus, performance demands not only memorization of the song, but intense concentration to avoid going wrong, and an equal contribution from each participant. There are no soloists, except in the opening rag, and each group sings the same number of repetitions as the other, in varied order. Thus, the child learns to perform a role in a group and interact meaningfully with others. He learns to be a team player, to contribute appropriately without standing out from his peers. When friends and I recently made a short film featuring the Dattatreya group, they criticised our audio balance because we had allowed some voices to be slightly more prominent than others. Newars say that a person who can't coordinate with others, act reliably, or behave in a socially graceful manner is a person out of tune or out of time with his fellows. A person who talks too much sings a long rag. Conversely, one who has learned to sing or play will also acquire personal charisma, charm and influence. One who doesn't have these qualities is not blessed by Nasadyo, the god of music and dance. The importance of making an equal contribution to a collaborative social enterprise extends to the social organisation of the Dafa group, where onerous duties, such as organising and paying for a feast, are allocated to every member in turn according to a written schedule. Attendance at singing sessions and feasts is also carefully recorded, and fines may be imposed. Reciprocity also applies to non-musical activities. Thus, if a farmer takes the help of a neighbour for a major agricultural task, this will be reciprocated with an equal number of hours' work in the neighbour's fields at some future date. As a Bhaktapurian told Stephen Parish, "Suppose a person is making a courtyard. I must help them. Others must help. Even if the help is not really needed, they will help. Help must be offered when someone dies too. This help is not just voluntary, it is a duty. It is dharma. But if we are alone, there is no help for those who are alone. We must have the help of others in order to live." These are some of the life lessons and cultural patterns that Newars say are inculcated through music. Others might include respect for the teachers, their knowledge and skills, education in the religious beliefs and observances of Newar Hinduism and Buddhism, and understanding of the social and religious rituals that consecrate every important act. But it's striking that not only the Dafa group as a social institution, but also the process of musical performance, with its finely balanced roles, seems intended to articulate wider cultural patterns. In conclusion, I've argued that Dafa songs, like the Aboriginal songs that Linda told us about at SOAS, would represent a tragic loss were they to disappear, because of the cultural knowledge bound up in them and in associated performance practices. They enable the commemoration of the country of Nepal, especially the Kathmandu Valley, in which the gods reside in their innumerable temples. The songs themselves, through their words, take the singer on virtual pilgrimage to deities and shrines in other parts of the valley, just as community groups often hire a bus to take them there physically. Songs also enable commemoration of the ancestors, both the long-dead Newar kings and their vanished courtly world, and the more recent forebears of the singers themselves. Through the complex process of performance, Dafa embodies the principle of reciprocity that Newas believe is essential for the survival of the individual within society, rather as team sports do in Western societies. And through training and initiation into music, the individual receives the social knowledge and skills that enculturate him into membership of the adult community. Though differently defined and conceived and formed through very different histories, in both Nepal and Australia, country, ancestors, community, and the individual are all evoked or engaged in the complex world that songs remember, nurture, and continually recreate through their transmission and performance. It might be appropriate to end with another quotation. So I've appropriated 3 sentences from the 2002 Garma Statement on Indigenous music and performance. I assume it was meant to apply, mutatis mutandis, to endangered song traditions around the world, and it certainly applies to the traditional music of the Newas. It is through song, dance, and associated ceremony that indigenous people sustain their cultures and maintain the law, one might say the dharma, and a sense of self within the world. Performance traditions are the foundation of social and personal well-being. Without immediate action, many indigenous music and dance traditions are in danger of extinction, with potentially destructive consequences for the fabric of indigenous society and culture. Thank you very much.